Today we're going to talk about the finishing process as it applies to metals. For different processes, you may only use portions of this information, but it's important to understand all of it so you can finish your work as necessary for different projects. As you can see, the essential question is, what makes knowledge of tools, techniques, and the order in which they should be used essential to creating jewelry and sculpture? As always, the Cornell notes are provided for you so you can take notes on the process while you're looking at the presentation or listening to the video. Again, the notes will help with any quizzes on safety and techniques because you can use them on the quiz. Our learning targets are: I understand the tools, techniques, and order of the finishing process in order to create a piece that is well crafted and shiny. I understand all safety protocols to protect my body and others during the finishing process. Finishing is the final step in the creation of jewelry. Most people see this as making their work shiny, but there are several other parts to the process, in addition to buffing, that we will be talking about shortly. One thing to note is that you have to be careful with the tools because if you push too hard on a tool or don't pay attention to what you're doing, you'll create more problems. There are normally 3 steps to the finishing process: filing, sanding, and buffing. Filing removes the most flaws, sanding refines metal further, and buffing makes metal shiny. These steps should always go in this order. Tools for filing include a Dremel tool, grinding bits, a Dremel wrench, and files of many types and sizes. Here you can see the half-round file is the most versatile and you'll use that more often than not. There are also microfiles, rifler files, and a file card that you'll have to use. The file card actually helps you get metal out of the file so you can continue working. Other tools for filing include vices that are attached to the tables and matboard scraps, which protect your piece from indentation as you tighten the vise. As you start to file your work, you should consider your safety. Much of the finishing process produces very small particles that can be inhaled, so you should wear a mask. After we talk about this, the instructor will give you a mask that you should write your name on with Sharpie and keep in your locker for the year as it's needed for different processes. Like other processes, you should wear safety glasses because during the finishing process, we will be using Dremels at times to sand or grind our work, and therefore there may be small debris that flies in the air. Filing is a process that will remove problems in your work and will help refine or make perfect the shapes that were imperfectly cut, but it can also cause problems if you push too hard on the file. This is a very slow process. Therefore, you might need to come in for enrichment in order to get more work done. You can select whatever type of file you need to refine the shapes you have cut. There are even microfiles and rifler files that are curved in order to help you get into small areas. Hopefully on the upper right you can see the microfiles compared to a quarter. Files only cut on the push stroke. Therefore, pulling backward on the file does not refine your shape. It also may wreck the file. Other filing tips are that when you have a downward or concave surface, you should use the rounded side of the file. When you have a convex surface or a surface that moves upward, you should use the flat side of the file. This slide shows you a person using the flat side of the file to true up the flat part of the triangular piercing you can see. Another part of filing is beveling, which creates a slight angle on your work. Beveling can create additional interest in your work if used appropriately. Another thing you need to think about is craftsmanship. Both the inside and outside of any piece of jewelry, such as this ring, should be filed, sanded, and buffed. If you were to buy it in a store, the entire piece would be shiny with no flaws. That is the kind of professionalism I'm trying to teach you. This is just another reminder that the file card will help remove metal filings from tools so they can continue to work properly. Again, you have to brush back and forth perpendicularly from the file to remove metal filings that are stuck in the file. Sanding is the second step in the finishing process. Most people debate between whether filing or sanding is the longest part in the creation of jewelry, but sanding often comes home with the prize. Again, you have to be very patient because this is a very slow process. There are multiple grits of sandpaper that you're going to have to use in order to accomplish this task. When you're buffing with the compounds, you will need to have 2 different types of cloth to wipe the work down when you're finished. One piece of cloth should be labeled with a T for Tripoli, and the other cloth should be labeled with an R for Rouge. What you'll notice about sanding is that it initially creates more scratches in your work. But what you need to realize is that light gets trapped in the scratches, and the only way to remove those problems is to create more scratches with a rough sandpaper and move consistently through less coarse grits in order to make those scratches smaller and smaller until our eyes can't detect them. The sandpapers are rougher the smaller the number on the back is. The larger numbers are more fine grits of sandpaper because they're smaller pieces of sand on the paper. The numbers mean that there are 200 pieces of sand per square inch on a sandpaper that is 200 grit, and 600 pieces of sand on a square inch of 600 grit sandpaper. You can actually see the pieces getting smaller if you look closely enough at this slide or at real sandpaper. As mentioned earlier, you need to start with 220 grit and then move progressively through the sandpapers until you reach 600. As you do this, it's important to realize that all the scratches of 1 grit of sandpaper should be going all the same direction before moving to the next grit. When you initially start the new grit of sandpaper, you should sand perpendicular to the first grit and continue sanding until the previous scratches are gone. This is why this slide says no plaid shirts. All scratches on the next grit should be completely gone before you move to the next finer sandpaper. This slide shows more clearly under magnification scratches going multiple directions on the left-hand image, while the image on the right shows scratches all going the same direction. Another tip for sanding is that if you cut sandpaper into small dental floss-like strips, you can sand the piercings that you created. As you start this process, you also need to realize that it's a good time to wrap your work in cloth and put it in a baggie each day. If you just throw your work carelessly in your toolkit, you'll create scratches that you'll have to get out during the next class, which wastes time. Buffing is the last step in the finishing process. It is the part of the process that makes your work very shiny. Tools for this process are buffing wheels, hand vices, mat board scraps, Dremel tools, buffing mandrels, Dremel wrenches, and buffing compounds. Here you can see there are 2 different kinds of buffing compounds. Tripoli should always be used first, and Rouge should always be used second. If you look at them closely, you can see that Tripoli is brown in color and Rouge is red or purple in color. You also need to use the buffing rake in order to get compound and metal off of the buffs that are on the buffing wheel as you are working. You will also have to use buffing cloths while you work. Again, since Tripoli is more coarse than Rouge, you want to label the buffing cloths. One should have a T on it and your other buffing cloth should have an R. You do not want to mix them up because Tripoli will scratch the work you've done on Rouge. This is another good area to stop and remind you to wear safety glasses and a mask to protect your lungs. You also need to remember to tie your hair back. The buffing wheels spin so fast that they will literally rip your hair out. I'm sure none of you with long hair want that, so I know you'll make sure to tie your long hair back. In this slide, you can see that the man didn't wear a mask, which was a bad idea because the compound went all over his face. At least he was wearing safety glasses. Looking at how dirty this man got, hopefully you can see that it's probably a good idea to wear a smock as well to protect your clothes. The smock bin is near the windows in the classroom by the safety glasses cabinet. Another tip here is to put a piece of cloth in the hand vise when you're buffing. Make sure the cloth isn't too long or it could get caught in the wheel. When you are done buffing, you should always wipe the work with the cloth you previously labeled immediately after buffing so the compound comes off the work. You can also use soap and water and a toothbrush to gently scrub the smaller areas of your work. You could also put the piece in the ultrasonic cleaner. When the power is turned on, it vibrates and it actually will help you get the compound out of your piece. You may still need to use a toothbrush once this is finished, and then at the end you'll still need to take a clean cloth to wipe down any compound that still might be on your piece. Another buffing tip is that you could hold a piece of wood underneath pieces being buffed so that they don't bend. This is optimal if you have a lot of piercings in your piece or if it's very, very delicate. Other tips are you should stay on the bottom quarter of the wheel. Here you can see a picture illustrating that bottom quarter. If you go anywhere else, the buffing wheel may grab your piece and fling it at you. Here is another image of a buffing rake, and again we want to have separate buffs for each compound, one labeled with a T for Tripoli and the other labeled with an R for Rouge. This also happens with the Dremel tools and with the buffing cloth so that everything stays separate. The reason that you need to separate things is just like the sandpapers, Tripoli is a more coarse compound than Rouge, and you need to keep those cloths separate or you'll create scratches in your work. Just like we did with the sandpaper, you can see you're going to go perpendicular with Tripoli to what was sanded with 600. You would then change directions again when you move to Rouge. One other thing to note is you should always be using cloth when you start buffing. You do not want to use paper towel. Paper towel will scratch your work. This slide shows you again the finishing process as a whole, from sanding through buffing in order to obtain a high shine. Whether you finished your piece to a high shine or not, you will need to make the piece functional in order to wear it. Often this means adding findings to the piece such as chain, clasps, or earring wires. We will talk more about that part of the process soon. At this point, you should be able to add at least 2 more steps to the initial steps you created for the piece. Your instructor will be looking for those in your final portfolio submission, so make sure that you add those to your sketchbook now.